In a small town like Pacific Glade, death isn't always faceless. It hits you especially hard when you're a cop. That body dragged into the coroner's office, that victim slumped and broken behind the lines of police tape. That could be your neighbor, your kid's algebra teacher, or that sweet old lady you pass every week at the grocery store. Death doesn't just come for the people on TV. Death slips by you every day, so close you feel the breeze on your cheeks as it passes, and leaves your world a little emptier. And sometimes you notice. Sometimes you don't. But it changes you either way. My father-in-law, Peter Lambrick, died on an early spring morning. He was gray-haired and stooped, but spry for his age and the carved wooden cane that he walked with mostly for show. He'd brag to anyone who'd listen about how he'd won the stick off a stranger at the Hanging Rock. Had him sulking in the corner like a raccoon on an empty trash can, he'd say. Never seen the cards hate a man the way they did that day. He was strung up and he knew it. Threw his hand on the table, stormed out, but not before leaving me this beauty. And he'd show it off by dancing a little jig. He called it his wizard's staff. It was his prized possession, his lucky talisman. But even luck can't stop death. It's barreling towards you at 80 miles an hour. He just stepped outside to grab the paper, leaning sturdily against his lucky staff, plodding through the dewy grass to the mailbox. The morning air was cold, and his joints must have been aching, but he pressed stubbornly onward, all the way to the street. The newspaper boy had shoved the thing in deep, and he had to set the cane aside to yank it out. I don't know if he heard the engine getting closer. When he set his mind to something, my dear old father-in-law tended to get lost in his own thoughts, and it wasn't uncommon to see him glaze-eyed and staring off into space. The driver of the car was named Vera Hanscom. She was going fast. Way faster than a crappy old minivan was probably built to handle. But there was a wailing baby in the back seat with a spreading rash, and two children who were yelling over each other about God knows what. Poor harried Vera turned back for just a second to put the kids in their place, but her hand slipped as she did so, and the minivan lurched onto the sidewalk like a drunken man. It's only for a second. But 1 second was all it took. The van struck Peter head on, sent him flying across the yard. The coroner told me he was dead even before he struck the side of his neighbor's house. Broken back, he'd said, among other things. I didn't need to know the details. All I knew was that there would be no more jigs, no more stories. Just glazed eyes forever. Vera knew what she'd done, but she panicked and hightailed it away from the scene with her 3 screaming children in tow. She might have gotten away, too, if another neighbor hadn't seen the whole thing and phoned in her license plate to the police. In no time, she was surrounded by cruisers, sirens blaring and lights flashing. The terrified mother left the vehicle with her hands up and tears streaming down her cheeks. They took her and the children down to the station, where Vera wept and shook and confessed to the whole thing, her whole body heaving with sobs. Calls were made, officers were sent to bring in the body, everyone was running around trying to keep the situation from getting any worse. It was a big mess. In all the confusion, everyone forgot about the rashy little infant whose wailing had given way to a soft, pained whimper. In a matter of hours, the baby was dead. Vera didn't even notice until she tried rocking the tiny corpse awake. Now, she hadn't broken before. That was the crack that split her open. People say her anguished cries could be heard for miles. Karma, some might say. A life for a life, which is bullshit, of course, because no cosmic force was watching over that road, none that cared anyway. Death came and death went, and left 2 big holes where it had been. That was that. The story went on. This time, it was missing a couple of players. Nico Sanchez was the one who called us at home, and Ruth was the one who answered. I didn't know what they were discussing at first, but I saw Ruth's smile slip. Saw her warm persona falter for just a moment, and I knew enough. She composed herself quickly and listened to what Sanchez had to say, but that half-second slip had It said it all. And even though I never saw her cry, not even at the funeral, I knew it was taking everything she had to keep herself composed. She did it, though. She smiled at the mourners and told them stories and hugged them close and eased their pain, even when she herself was hurting. Guess, well, that was Ruth. I was the cop. But she had always been the fighter. The wake was a quiet affair. Peter had been one of those rare souls who actually moved to the glade and stayed here. Something about the place seemed to discourage visitors from staying long, but not Peter. He loved the trees. He loved the cool summers and the way the sun set so strangely. So he planted himself down, and before long it was like he'd lived here all his life. The consequence of this was that most of his family lived outside the Pacific Glade, and they apparently had no desire to come here, not even to see him off. Ruth's cousin Trina was the only member of the Lambert clan to show up on the day of the wake. The rest of the mourners, few as they were neighbors and friends, fellow gladers here to honor one of their own. The Locklear funeral home wasn't extravagant, but Ruth had worked with the family to drape the visitation room in violet banners, Peter's favorite color, lay out a table of small refreshments. I grabbed a glass of water and eyed the vegetable platter, wondering if it would be distasteful to munch away during my father-in-law's wake. Ruth wandered by me, and I took the opportunity to leave the food and join her by Peter's casket. The dead were just sleeping, I thought. And not for the first time. Ruth's dad looked like he'd simply nodded off for a bit. Corner had set his limbs straight and given his cheeks a blush he'd never had before in life. I've seen plenty of corpses. After the whole embalming thing, most of them look like a waxy mannequin. Peter looked like he might wake up at any moment. A familiar stick lay with him in the casket. The cane had survived what its owner had not, whole and unbroken. It now rested under Peter's cold hands. His talisman would go to the grave with him. Did I ever tell you he took me flying? I said. Back when we were engaged, he rented a helicopter, somehow, and flew us all over the glade. Had no idea he knew how to pilot one of those things. He'd do all these dips and dives and scare the shit out of me. And every time he would laugh, that wheezy, good-natured laugh of his, and I knew we weren't in any real danger. Took a sip from my glass. At one point, he even let me take over. Looking down at everything, God. Ruth, it was incredible. It's like being one of the birds. You never really appreciate the trees until you see them from up there. The lakes and the rivers and the highways cutting through the forest. It looked like one big nervous system, like this huge engine keeping the glade in motion. Puts things in perspective, you know? Ruth didn't look at me. She swished the water in her own glass and stared down at her father's body. I never knew he flew, she said. But it doesn't surprise me. That always did seem to be reaching for the sky. I kissed her hair and held her close for a moment. She leaned her head against mine and sighed. That was the moment I expected the tears to flow, for all the sadness to come gushing out, but after a few seconds, she gently detached herself and went to talk with her cousin. I listened to her hushed voice, but couldn't make out a word of the conversation. The wake went on for another couple of hours as mourners straggled in and out. I finally gave in and went for the hors d'oeuvres. They'd barely been touched, which seems like a waste to me. And I was in the process of biting into a canapé when my son Rory approached, holding a cup of water. He was small for his age, and the suit that we rented for him looked absurdly big on his tiny shoulders. He picked at his cuffs and stared up at me. It looked like he wanted to say something. What is it, Rory? He bit his lip, eyes wide, and I thought, a bit scared. For a second, I thought he wasn't going to speak at all. Then, under his breath, he mumbled, Saw Grandpa. I know, I said. It's not easy to see him lying there like that, but Rory shook his head vigorously. I don't mean in the coffin. I mean outside. A tiny chill went through me, but I suppressed it. I smiled down at my son and patted his shoulder in what I hoped was a reassuring way. I'm sure it's nothing, I said. But why don't you show me anyway? Rory bit his lip again, but nodded. He led me over to the window by the refreshment table, placing down his cup. He raised a finger and pointed through the glass. Grandpa was out there. muttered. In the graveyard. He just stood there and stared